I don't believe in the supernatural today, but I used to. So, there I was, a 7-year-old kid in rural Utah. I was staying the night at my grandparents' house on Main Street. I didn't want to sleep, so around midnight I went down into their basement. I took my Matchbox cars and played Night City with my glowing better blocks. I had this little metropolis going on when my great-uncle came down to play with me. Should I mention that my great-uncle died when I was 2? Well, he did. Anyway, my great-uncle and I played Night City for a good hour. I remember it like it was yesterday. He drove the Lincoln because it was his favorite car. Anyway, it got late, and he said that he had to leave so he wouldn't miss his train. He left, and I went back up to go to sleep. The next morning, I asked my grandparents when Uncle was coming back to play again. My grandparents were slightly offended that I brought this up. They hadn't seen him since before I was born, and wanted nothing to do with him. He was apparently the black sheep of the family. I told them that him and I played cars, and showed them the car that he drove into the city. They were pretty uncomfortable with this, and chalked it up to my imagination. I never met my great-uncle. Again, he died when I was only 2. Over the years since then, I've learned that he drove both a train for Union Pacific and a Lincoln Mach 7. Like I said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't know how 7-year-old me knew things about an estranged relative who died when I was only 2 and was never spoken of due to certain family issues. To this day, I don't know what happened that night, but I vividly remember playing Night City with some guy who said he was my uncle like it was yesterday. He was super nice, and at the end of the game simply left out the back door. I was really young. I would guess 8 to 10 years old, but that's just a ballpark guess. I shared a room with my younger brother. Our room was very large, and for some reason we put our bunk beds right in the middle of the room, with the side of the bed facing the doorway. I had top bunk. Every morning, our mom would come into our room to wake us up for school. It was the worst feeling. This morning, I had already been awake for some time, just lying in bed. It was still dark outside. Depending on the time of year, I don't really remember. It being dark when we were getting up for school might have been normal. So I'm lying there in bed. The door to our room opens. It doesn't take much effort to turn my gaze to the door. I see a woman standing in the doorway. She was wearing some kind of white gown, who I can only assume was my mother, even though I never recall her ever wearing an outfit like that. She takes a step in, closes the door behind her, and slowly starts approaching our beds. She gets so close that I'm no longer able to see her because of the angle I have being on the top bunk. I assume she's going to start waking up my brother at any moment, so I do that kid thing where I shut my eyes and pretend to be asleep. I wait, and wait, and wait. I finally open my eyes. The door is still closed. I'm super confused at this point, so I lean over the railing to see what she's up to, and there was no one there. I freak out and cover my head with all of my blankets and lie there for what felt like quite a bit of time until I fell back asleep. I don't believe in ghosts. I'm sure there's a completely rational explanation for this. Maybe it was my mom, and I just didn't hear her open and close the door to leave again. Maybe there was no one there at all, and I imagined the whole thing. I don't know. This happened about 8 or so years ago around Thanksgiving at my grandma's house. Everyone was asleep except for me. The only people in the house were my grandparents, my mom, brother, and I. No one else. This is key. I was on the computer because I couldn't sleep. I turned on a small TV to watch Adult Swim while I browsed the internet. At around 4:30 a.m., I started getting a chill up my spine, and I heard some children laugh, distinctly the voices of a little girl and boy. I know I'm all by myself as far as being awake, so I turned to look at the TV, and it was in the middle of an Inuyasha fight sequence, so there's no way the laughter was coming from that. I checked the computer sound settings, and I had every possible output muted, so it wasn't that either. I sat there confused for a few moments while the giggles of the 2 children were playing in the background. I figured maybe the radio in the kitchen was on. It was digital, so maybe it just came on for some reason, or it had a timer. I got up, and I kid you not, as I was walking to the door, with each step, the laughter grew louder, from giggling to guffaws to hard laughter. Once that started, I started to hear a baby cry as well. What's going through my mind now is, what the fuck kind of radio show is that? And I had just took 3 steps. I was nowhere near the door. I took a few more steps, and the laughter turned hysterical, if not manic. The baby's cries turned to screams and wails, as if it were in pain. I was trembling and terrified with each step I took to the doorway, but my mind was on autopilot. I needed to get out there and across the hall to my mom, who surely would help me and notice the weird sounds too. The last couple of steps increased the laughter and crying to almost deafening. It was like I was at a concert and the speakers were directly in my ears blasting noise. It was actually painful and scared the shit out of me. I took all the courage I had, and as soon as I reached the doorway, I was going to sprint. I flung open the door and started to run, but then something shoved me back. I felt these hands at my chest push me back into the room with enough force to throw me off balance. The crying and laughter stopped as soon as I went back into the room. This all happened within 20 to 30 seconds, but it felt more like 10 minutes. I was so scared, I cried and slept in the tiny armchair before my grandma came into the room and made me sleep in her bed downstairs. From the time I was about 12 to 17 years old, I lived in what I believe to be a haunted house. I've never had experiences like I had in that house since moving out. A few specific memories come to mind. Once I was hanging up laundry in my closet. I heard someone whisper my name in my ear, clear as day. I had never sprinted out of a room so fast. Another time, my sister and I had friends over, and we decided to use a tape recorder to ask questions to the ghosts like they do on those paranormal shows. We played the tape not expecting to hear anything, and I could hear a very soft voice say, "I'm in the closet." We were sitting near a small closet in the basement. My parents eventually decided to sell the house. We moved into a new place before selling this place. My sister stopped by the house after there had been a couple of showings to turn out the lights in the house. She went to turn off the lights in the basement, which had multiple light switches. One was at the far end of the basement, away from the stairs. She turned off the light and swore she heard heavy footfalls of someone running towards her. She ran out of the house without turning off the rest of the lights and just locked the door. That was the last time either of us went back, until we were in the neighborhood and the new owners offered to show us the renovations they made. Nothing happened then, but they did ask us if we wanted to babysit their kids. We politely declined. So, when I was 14, my dad died. There's no need to be sad about it, he was an ass. When he was alive, he'd love to sneak up on people and scare the shit out of them. One of the ways he would do just that is to silently creep up and chill out in the corner of your vision until you realized there was this asshole staring at you. After he passed away, I'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and I would see him just glide up into the corner of my vision across the room and stand and stare at me from the front entryway. I'd look over, and poof, nothing there. Now, this can be easily written off as me being tired, or my mind playing tricks on me, or whatever, but that isn't all of it. Dad loved to watch history and nature shows, and this was back when the History, Discovery, and A&E channels actually played decent documentaries and biographies and the like. He was an insomniac, so he'd always be up late watching one of those channels, and the walls were incredibly thin, so I'd always have to beg him to turn the damn sound down so I could sleep when I was a kid. After he died, for a few months, at least once a week, I'd be in bed, and all of a sudden I'd hear the TV on in the living room. It would be a documentary on ants, or a biography of Churchill, and other things. It spooked me, definitely. My brother wasn't doing it, because for one, he's deaf, and if he were to watch TV, he'd mute it, and also he had his own TV. My mom worked nights, and it always happens when she wasn't home, and at this point my sister had been living on her own for quite some time. I'd get up to see what happened, maybe the cat had turned on the TV, yeah? But no, Max the tuxedo was usually with me in bed or outside. And I'd be able to hear the TV drone on about worker ants or whatever, as I made my way down the hallway, through the kitchen and dining room, and to the front entryway. Once I'd get to the spot where I could see the living room and the TV, all noise would cease. It'd be dead silent, so quiet you could probably hear a spider fart. But wait, there's more. After he passed, the locked, chained, and dead-bolted front door would open on its own all the time to let the cat in. This one happened in front of everyone, and at differing points over the winter after dear old dad had kicked the bucket. But the thing that really got me is this. I was down in the basement one night watching TV. My mom was home and in the living room. Whenever she needed me, she'd stomp on the floor to get my attention. And that night, she stomped something furious. I raced upstairs, and she was sitting in a chair with a wooden TV tray table in front of her. On the table was a styrofoam cup, and it was shaking, violently. There were no open windows, and there were no fans. I picked up that fucking cup and checked it for wires and strings. Absolutely fucking nothing was attached to it. I put it back on the table, and it would shake again. Mom, of course, is saying that Dad had to be doing it. And nothing else. The creeping visions, the cat coming in through a bolted and chained front door, and the documentaries about ants being heard at all hours of the night freaked me out as much as that damn cup. I knew my mom wasn't doing it. I checked and double-checked. The table was perfectly flat on the floor. It didn't wobble. There wasn't a way to make that cup move, and not the table itself, you know? It just thoroughly spooked me. And Mom kept saying that it had to be Dad. He was a trickster, yada yada. So, in that moment, I just shouted out, "If that's you, Dad, knock it the fuck off!" And suddenly, it stopped. I didn't even finish saying it when the cup stopped shaking. After the cup incident, the cat had to wait for a real live human to open the door for him again. I heard no more documentaries in the middle of the night, and I didn't ever see Dad creep up in the corner of my vision to stare at me again. So, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and we had plenty of battlefields and such to visit for school field trips. In 5th grade, my class went to the Belle Grove Plantation, which was at Cedar Creek Battlefield. It was a cool house, still has damage to her columns from gunfire from the battle. Anywho, my class was in the kitchen of the plantation, listening to the tour lady talk about whatever it is you'd tell a bunch of 10-year-olds about plantation life. There are these big double doors on each side of the room, and they're open. And then we hear humming coming from outside. The teacher's aide, who I'll call Bulldog, because she looked like one, told us that whoever was humming to knock it off. But that's the thing, it wasn't any of us, it was coming from outside. Bulldog goes out one side of the kitchen, comes back in and goes out the other side that leads to the gardens. She comes back in, says to the tour lady that no one at all is out there, but she swears that she could hear the humming right there in the garden. Doesn't sound like much, right? Well, fast forward a few years, and I'm reading a Ghosts of Virginia book, and there was a story about Belle Grove in it. Apparently, the lady of the house was found in the smokehouse one day, badly beaten, half in the embers, with clear fist imprints on her face. She died just a few days later. A slave girl was accused of the beating and the murder, and was hanged for it. The lady of the house apparently liked to walk in the garden, and was always humming. Various people over the years were witnesses, I guess you could say, to that ethereal humming that would take place in the garden. I used to work at this radio station in New Mexico that was listed as one of the most haunted places in the state. It was an old house that had been converted into offices. The story goes that the last owner of the house made a living by carving gravestones in the basement, and that he had died while working on one. When the new owners of the building took over, they left the stone where it was. That was a mistake. I heard stories from some people who worked there back then. Shadowy figures seen in unoccupied rooms, lights going on and off for no apparent reason. Supposedly, all the activity died down when the stone was moved out of there. Well, most of it. When I worked there, the outline of the stone was still there on the basement floor, and as I worked the night shift, I saw some weird shit. For starters, the door to the basement was in the break room, and in order to get to the vending machine, you had to walk by the door. Most of the time it was no big deal, but on occasion, I would start to walk past and this terrifying feeling came over me. The hair on my neck and arms would stand up, and it was all I could do to not run out of there. Then one night, I went out into the offices and turned off all the lights. You know, save some electricity and whatnot. I went back into the studio to keep doing my show. A little while later, I walked out and saw that all the lights were back on. There was nobody else in that building. There was also a couple of times when I watched CD players open and close on their own, which brings me to the freakiest story told to me by the overnight guy. He was doing a show, playing the new Bon Jovi song off the album, and the lights flickered for a moment. When he looked down at the display on the CD player, it was showing a different track as playing, though the song he'd been playing kept going. We pulled out the album and looked for the track that was indicated as playing. It was a song called I'll Sleep When I'm Dead. I was 9 to 11 years old. My family lived in a 3-bedroom duplex. I had my own room across from my mom's room down a short hallway. My older brother's room was on the opposite side of the house. For the full 3 to 4 years that we lived there, I couldn't sleep facing my wall. Any time I fell asleep or attempted to while facing the wall, I would feel someone smack me in the back of the head with their hand. At first, I thought this was my older brother being an ass, until it happened while my very loud squeaky door was shut. It also happened for the 6+ months he was in juvie. My mother does not move quickly or quietly, and it even happened while I had a friend stay the night, but only to me, and only when I tried to sleep facing the wall. So one night my door was left open when I went to bed. I was fast asleep on my back when I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and had the feeling someone was standing above me. I looked up to see a long, soft blue light suspended 6 to 12 inches above the floor in the center of the straight hallway between my mom's room and mine. I was upside down, so after about a minute of staring into this soft blue light, I turned over. After a few seconds, I noticed that there's a slim middle-aged man floating there covered in the blue light. He was making eye contact with me, and his face was expressionless. I had never seen him before, but it didn't really scare me for some reason. About 10 uninterrupted minutes of just staring at each other. Somehow, while looking at him, I fell back asleep. I never saw that man again. However, until the day I moved out, I couldn't sleep facing the wall, or I would be awoken with a quick smack to the back of the head in the middle of the night. No one believed me, of course. This happened to me when I was 9, in 2010. My friend in the neighborhood found an Ouija board in his brother's stuff while he was away at college. He told me what it was and asked me if I wanted to play it with him. Trying to impress him, I said yes. We went into his room and we tried it out. Nothing happened, and we were left disappointed. Later that week, he called me and told me that he looked up how to use the board properly and wanted to give it another go. I agreed, as I was more confident that nothing would happen again. So we grabbed a bunch of scented candles, and we placed them around the board and did the whole seance stuff. We asked the board if anyone was there, and it of course went to yes. We thought the other was just messing around, but we agreed to take it seriously because I didn't really care if it was a stupid joke. We asked the ghost what its name was, and it spelled out Owen. My friend asked if it was a person, and it went to no. We asked what it was, and it spelled out demon. I then asked it to prove it. You know that call in the intro to Finding Bigfoot? Well, that's the closest thing to what we heard from the garage. Keep in mind, it was only us in the house. It scared the shit out of us and we ran out of the house. We eventually checked the garage. Nothing. Anyway, a few weeks go by, and he tells me how he is having paranormal experiences. He feels like he's being watched whenever he's downstairs in the kitchen or living room. He feels someone sitting on the end of his bed every night. Every time he walks past the garage, he feels someone grab his wrist and pull it towards the garage. Whenever I went over, I always got the feeling that someone was looking at me from the ceiling. It was definitely unnatural. Then came the scariest part of all. We were at his house playing Army in his room while no one else was home, and we began to hear heavy footsteps downstairs, except whatever was making it had hooves. It sounded like a full-grown horse was walking around downstairs. Then we heard someone begin to laugh and cough at the same time. My friend ran over to the door and slammed it shut, and we hid. He hid under his bed, while I hid in his closet. Then it sounded like someone began scratching his door with one big claw, like the ones raptors had on their big toe. He started crying, and I was on the verge of tears myself. My friend yelled, "Leave us alone, Owen! You're scaring us!" It began to stop, and then we heard it run down the stairs. My friend got up and threw me out of the closet and grabbed the Ouija board that was in there with me. He ran down the stairs, ripped the screen door off his gas fireplace, threw the thing in there, put the screen back on, and went to turn it on. When he was about to turn it on, we heard a loud moan from the basement, which was right behind my friend. He flicked the fireplace on, and the board began to burn. That was the end of that. We played outside since he was too scared to go back into his house until his parents got home. His parents came home and saw that he had burned his brother's Ouija board, and they grounded him and threw the burnt board away. That time marked the end of the paranormal experiences in my friend's house, and that's why I'll never take part in one of those games again. I was in the Yukon on a winter camping trip a couple of years after my mom died. We had a winter camp set up, but I wanted to sleep outside because it seemed adventurous, and I'm good at making bad decisions. One night I woke up because it was too cold to sleep, -20 degrees, and I was lying in my bag shivering and thinking about my mom, and then the northern lights started. I've seen the lights a few times before, but I'd never seen them like this. They went from north to south in waves, straight over my head, one after the other, just like waves hitting a beach. I watched for a minute, and then I thought, wow, I bet everyone else would love to see this. So I got out of my bag and ran to the tent to wake people up. They sort of wasted time getting dressed and getting their lamps on and whatever, and I went back to my bag. By the time the others were dressed and outside, the lights had already faded. They stood around in the cold for a few minutes waiting for the lights to come back, but they got too cold and went back to bed. Almost immediately after their tent zipper closed, the lights came back, even brighter than before. I'm not religious and not especially spiritual, but my mom was very spiritual, and it was like a sign from Mother Nature, or whatever you want to call it, telling me I was okay, and that she was always with me. I went through the entire grieving cycle over the space of an hour or so that night. It completely changed my life. I can't explain it, and it still brings tears to my eyes to think about it.